rampant in the West right now. I really like to call it Western spirituality because it's Eastern in modern garb. I was born and raised in India, in Delhi. My ancestors came from the highest caste of the Hindu priesthood in the deep south of Kerala. But my father was from Kerala, but my native language is Hindi because I was raised in Delhi. And in Delhi, in Hindi, we have a phrase when somebody who is totally Indian and goes overseas for a week and comes back and lives like a Westerner the rest of his or her life, we have an unkind description. We call that person a desi murgi pardesi chal, which literally means this is a local chicken with a foreign walk. Desi murgi pardesi chal. And the truth of the matter is, the Western spirituality is actually an Eastern worldview in a Western dress. It is realigned, reconfigured and made to look like all that would appeal to the Westerner, sometimes violating the deepest precepts of what the original philosophy actually held to and maintained. But I was, debating and dialoguing with a lot from that kind of thinking, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but Oprah Winfrey, of course, made the Eastern spirituality very popular. In fact, my original title for the book was From Oprah to Chopra, and the publishers were not too happy with that. They wanted to give it some dignity, so I still snuck that in as a chapter title, but the book is called Why Jesus, and then they gave it the mouthful of a subtitle, Rediscovering His Truth in an Age of Mass-Marketed Spirituality. So there's no way you'll remember the subtitle, and I doubt you could ever order it on that basis. But the book is called Why Jesus, where I go into the impact in the late 1800s of Swami Vivekananda, who spoke at the World Religions Conference in Chicago. And from there on, the movement began, and in the 1960s, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi made transcendental meditation popular. The Beatles took to it, and many other celebrities. And now the world of Buddhism and Taoism and pantheism and all of that stuff is very popular, especially in the entertainment world. And the fascinating thing about it is that it's ultimately only another form of secularism with religious terminology. The goal of a radical secularist is to evict God from the human scene, make every interpretation totally naturalistic. And what does the new spirituality do? It basically ends up deifying the individual. So the Almighty God is ultimately evicted. You are the center of your universe, and man does become the measure of all things, except with new terms like mantra and chankara and tantra and all this stuff, which sounds very powerful and beautiful. When you unpack it, it has some very simple and sometimes simplistic explanations for what it is that life is really all about. Why Jesus in the midst of this? But not only do we have this conflict in the world of religion, we have this conflict also in the world of naturalism versus theistic worldviews. So I want to begin with a brief introduction of how the laws of argument actually go here. And then I will race through the substance of my talk. It's important for you to put these links in just in case you assume that I have ignored them, but obviously time will not permit me to get into all of these three links. The first one is this: whenever you and I get into a discussion or an argument or a difference of opinion, we assume that the laws of logic apply to reality. We assume that the correspondence theory of truth and the coherence theory of truth apply. What do I mean by that? When you make a particular assertion, you assume that that assertion, when stated as a fact, corresponds with reality. In a court of law, you always put the correspondence test to the test. And then when all of these assertions are put together, you bring a second test into the scene then, and that is the coherence test for truth. Individual statements meet the correspondence test. The entire argument must meet the coherence test. So the laws of logic must apply to reality. I remember one day somebody in an audience standing up and saying to me that he denied the law of non-contradiction. Little did it dawn on him that in denying it, he was actually affirming it at the same time. You cannot deny the law of non-contradiction. You may as well describe a one-ended stick. how do you talk about that? The laws of logic must apply to reality. And basically, there's not that many of them, by the way. There's just 3 or 4 of them, and they are easily sustainable. But then the next link you have to put into this argument is, what about theism itself? The very existence of an infinite, omnipotent, self-existent, uncaused first cause. How does one define the reality of God's existence? So you start with logic and reasoning, you move into the theistic arguments, and then you come to the third specific, why Jesus? That is really the logical flow of it. And that's why even a man like Stephen Hawking in his latest book made a huge blunder in the opening chapter when he basically said in these words, philosophy is dead. So the religious people didn't have to take his argument on. The entire department of philosophy at Cambridge decided to take him on, and one of the men from there said, maybe the oracular Professor Hawking has not kept up with philosophy as much as he thinks he has. And the battle raged actually between the philosophers and them. You've got people like Richard Dawkins at Oxford. The motto there is, the Lord is my light. And I was sharing last night, something very curious happened to Mr. Dawkins a few weeks ago. He was on a live radio program with the former dean of St. Paul's Cathedral. And interestingly, the dean himself was somewhat liberal in his religious worldview, but he nowhere near as Dawkins is. So Dawkins was mocking the Christian and made this comment that most Christians and I probably couldn't even name the first 4 Gospels. And so the dean of St. Paul looked at him and he said, Richard, you're a great defender of Charles Darwin and his book, The Origin of Species. And he said, yes, I am. He said, that's not the full title, as you know. It's a longer title. And Dawkins says, yes. Yeah. He said, can you name the full title for me? And Dawkins said, yeah, I know, there is a full title. He said, I know, go ahead, name it. And Dawkins starts, it says, The Origin of Species, oh my God, he said. You'll have to pardon me for even repeating that. But as the old bumper sticker said, as long as there are math tests, there will always be prayer in the schools. And so here was an avowed atheist who couldn't remember the title of The Origin of Species by means of natural selection, which is what the full title is. He couldn't remember it and actually called upon God, whom he didn't believe in, to help him remember the title that he wanted to quote. And recently in Washington, he made an astounding comment. In a large gathering, he said, if people still continue to believe in God, my response to you is mock them, ridicule them. Somebody asked me what I thought of it. I said, I agree with him, and let him start in Saudi Arabia. I said, I suspect it'll be a one-way ticket. But at least he will find out that all religions are not created equal. You don't just mock people with certain beliefs. There is a reality to these. And I want to read for you one statement and then move to my main thoughts here, because I think it's important, especially in a community such as this, that we understand the ramifications. David Berlinski is he's an avowed if not atheist and agnostic. He's not a believer in God. But David Berlinski, in responding to Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, wrote The Devil's Delusion. And in the flap of his book, he says this: has anyone provided a proof for God's inexistence? Not even close. Has quantum cosmology explained the emergence of the universe or why it is here? Not even close. Have the sciences explained why our universe seems to be fine-tuned to allow for the existence of life? Not even close. Are physicists and biologists willing to believe in anything so long as it is not religious thought? Close enough. Has rationalism and moral thought provided us with an understanding of what is good, what is right, what is moral? Not close enough. Has secularism in the terrible 20th century been a force for good? Not even close to being close. Is there a narrow and oppressive orthodoxy of thought and opinion within the sciences? Close enough. Does anything in the sciences or in their philosophy justify the claim that religious belief is irrational? Not even in the ballpark. Is scientific atheism a frivolous exercise in intellectual contempt? Dead on. Now, I didn't say that. This is David Berlinski. He's not very articulate when you're talking to him, but very much so with pen. And so you take the two links of the laws of reasoning and metaphysics, which is assumed even in physics when you dialogue and defend it. For example, why should a physicist be honest in his reportings? That's not a scientific fact you have to tell him. That's a metaphysical assumption of moral reasoning. So metaphysics precedes the theistic arguments. Theistic arguments precede the defense of Jesus Christ. And why Jesus? Let me give you 4 or 5 answers to this question, why I think indisputably his answers are unique and correspond with reality when put against the test. And when all of these answers are put together, it provides for an extremely coherent worldview. And a coherent worldview has to answer 4 questions of origin, meaning, morality, and destiny, and build a coherent set of answers to those questions. The first explanation I give to you is this: he is unique in his description of the human condition and the human dilemma. He describes your heart exactly as it is, as he has described my heart. When he says that deep in our heart is that sense of rebellion and pride and rejection against God. You know, we often belabor so many other sins, like the sexual sins and so on and so forth, and we deal with those in extenso constantly. But what brought Lucifer to his fall was not those, it was the clenched fist of pride and rebellion against God. I am the master of my own destiny. I am the self-referencing definer of all that is true and good and beautiful. And in the day that you eat of the knowledge of the tree of life, you shall be as God, not just knowing good and evil, but redefining good and evil. That's the point. In the day that you take of this one thing that is banned for you and me, you will start to define good and evil on your own. Take a look at the world today, and I ask you, isn't that not what we are seeing now? Is that not what we are seeing now? You know, once upon a time, you could make a statement like this. If you were absolutely certain about something, you can take that to the bank. Better be very careful now which bank we're talking about and what exactly that means. Certainty is gone. We are living with so much relativism. I have never in my life seen such an uncertainty in the human condition. I cover nearly 10 to 15 countries every year. Whether I'm talking to politicians, whether I'm talking to entertainers one-on-one, they will sit down across the table, or just people on the streets of countries, they will tell you the despair with which they live, despairing of hope for what humanity is doing to itself. You know, in 2010, the BBC did a survey across the globe. What is the number one thing you fear in life, and which is the human problem? For the first time in many, many years, poverty and the environment moved from 1 and 2 to 2 and 3. The number one answer given in a global survey, which ended in December 2010, done by the British Broadcasting Corporation, the number one fear in the human heart, they said, was this: corruption. Corruption. That people fear more that what's in your heart and mine is something they really cannot count on. Many, many years ago, it was Blaise Pascal who said, "It is in vain, O men, that you seek within yourselves the cure for your miseries. All your insight has led you to the knowledge that it is not in yourselves that you discover the true and the good. The philosophers promised them to you, but they were not able to keep that promise because they do not know what your true good is and what your true state is. How then could they have provided for you a cure for the ills they have not even understood? Your principal maladies are pride, which has separated you from God, and sensuality, which binds you to the earth. And they have done nothing but foster at least one of these two. If they have given God to you for an object, it is to pander to your pride. They have made you think that you are like him and resemble him in your nature. Those who have grasped the vanity of such pretensions have cast you down into the other end of the abyss and have led you to seek your good in lust, which is the lord of animals." Imagine writing this 2.5 centuries ago, It is in vain that you seek within yourselves the cure for all your miseries. Your insight has led you that it is not in yourselves. You don't just self-reference these things. Your principal maladies are pride and sensuality. They offer you God for an object, make you think you're like him. Pantheism. Those who've grasped the vanity of such pretensions lead you into the other end of the abyss to seek your good in lust, which is a lot of animals. And so the billboard on the side of buses a la Dawkins and others during Christmas time, there is no God, so go ahead and have fun anyway. Isn't that really the agenda at the end of it? Aldous Huxley wrote in 1946, I want this world not to have meaning because a meaningless world frees me to my own erotic and my own political pursuits. I want this world not to have meaning. It was in the 1980s that I got a glimpse of what the human heart can do when I visited the concentration camp of Auschwitz. I think any time any human being has an opportunity to visit that, to understand what the human heart is like, that's where you need to go. You'll never be the same again. That was a death camp where they were being obliterated at the rate of 12,000 every day. Every day. And a sign by Adolf Hitler outside the gas ovens there. I want to raise a generation of young people devoid of a conscience, cruel, imperious, relentless, cruel, imperious, and cruel. Generation devoid of a conscience, relentless, imperious, and cruel. He almost succeeded. Almost succeeded. Do you want a neighbor devoid of a conscience? Do you want a son or daughter devoid of a conscience? Do you want to be devoid of a conscience? You see, the human heart is desperately wicked. Understand it. Understand it. If you don't understand this analysis, you will never find a cure for your maladies. I've been an itinerant for 4 decades. I still get surprised with the temptations that can stalk me. It's true. They are the same that stalk you. The human heart is the same all over the world. And but for the grace of God, we'd get onto that slippery slope and there would be no stopping. Jesus describes your condition exactly as it is. And to deny it is actually to prove his point. But not only does he describe it, he gives you a cure and an answer for your malady. For this very cause did I come into the world, he talks about in the cross of Jesus Christ. The longer I am in the proclamation of truth, and anybody who's my teammates will tell you this, and we've worked together. Our ministry is now based in about 10 countries with just a whole team of apologists. Just before I began my last series of meetings, traveling, I forget which parts of the world I was going through 3 or 4 countries. I did an open forum at Clemson University, and on Thursday night, there were 9,000 in attendance on that Thursday night. They said it was the largest turnout outside of a sporting event. Same at Arizona State University, 9,000 on one given night. Students are hungry, and at the end of the evening, no matter where their questions take me, I will ultimately end in one place. And I'll tell them this: show me any place in the world where forgiveness is offered both with liberality and cost, the way it is in the gospel message. You ask a Muslim, how do you know you will be in paradise? Here's what he will tell you. First of all, he'll say, Inshallah, it's the will of Allah. I have no certainty. But then you ask him, how do you move towards it? Here's exactly what he or she will tell you. Your good deeds will have to outweigh your bad deeds on the day of judgment. I knew one Iraqi Muslim man who told me he went to the farthest mosque on Fridays and he would count his steps as he was walking there and write it down in his diary so he would put that down as accumulation of good deeds. Told me that. He demonstrated how he would take his strides walking. He said, this is exactly the way I was. You ask a pantheistic believer, whether it's Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, whatever, they'll say, karma, karma. You will have to pay, you will have to pay, you will have to pay. You read the gospel of Jesus Christ and you see the forgiveness that he offers liberally and freely at the great cost of his crucifixion. That's why the elementary school teacher writes, he came to my desk with a quivering lip. The lesson was done. Have you a new sheet for me, dear teacher? I've spoiled this one. I took his sheet all soiled and blotted and gave him a new one all unspotted, and into his tired heart I cried, do better now, my child. I went to the throne with a trembling heart. The day was done. Have you a new day for me, dear master? I've spoiled this one. He took my day all soiled and blotted, gave me a new one all unspotted, and into my tired heart he cried, do better now, my child. You turn through the pages of the Gospels and you see him at a well, talking to a woman with 5 shattered marriages. Think of what she must have felt when she was standing in front of the Messiah. He made her the first evangelist to the Samaritans. Another one with an alabaster ointment, probably made by a profession that embarrassed her at that time. She took that ointment, poured it on his feet. He paid her the greatest compliment, saying, wherever the gospel is preached, there shall this also be told of what this woman has done to me, in her expression of worship. Are you in need of forgiveness? Do you ever look into your heart and say, is there anybody that can cleanse this? When Oscar Wilde was on his deathbed in his 40s in a hotel in Paris, he was sitting by his lover, Robbie Ross, and he looked at Robbie Ross and he says, Robbie, did you ever love any one of those boys for their own sake? Why did a hedonist want a definition of love on his deathbed? I wrote a book on an imaginary conversation between Oscar Wilde and Jesus, called it Sense and Sensuality. Jesus speaks to Oscar Wilde. But he looked at Robbie Ross and he says to him, did you ever love any one of them for their own sake? Robbie says, no, I didn't. He said, neither did I. He said, bring me now a priest, bring me a minister. And in his book, The Ballad of Reading Jail, he said, only Christ is big enough. In his poem, The Ballad of Reading Jail, only Christ is big enough to cleanse this heart of mine. Amazing when the crunch comes in life to say, is there anyone who will forgive what I have really ended up living like? That's Christ who offers this for you. So first, he describes your condition. Second, he provides an answer to your malady, and I'll give you this quick illustration as I look at my notes here. It was a few years ago in Jerusalem when I was talking to one of the 4 founders of Hamas, Sheikh Talal. I was with one of the guests of the former Archbishop of Canterbury, George Carey. Took 5 of us. We went to meet with many of the leaders there, long list of them, religious, political, both sides. And on the last day, we were in Ramallah in the home of Sheikh Talal, who had spent 18 years in prison for all kinds of atrocities. And he was quite an animated kind of guy, and the room was full of tobacco smoke as we were there. We'd been his guests, and big names in the room. And at the end of it, the Archbishop gave the five of us a chance to ask him one question each. And I asked mine. I didn't like his answer, and I looked at him and I said, Sheikh, I really don't like your answer. I don't, but I won't get into it now. I just want to point one thing out to you. Not far away from here is a mountain. 5,000 years ago, a man by the name of Abraham took his son up that mountain as an expression of his faith to offer his son as a sacrifice. And as the sword is about to come down, God stops that arm and he says, stop. And the sheikh nodded. I said, let's not debate which son it was. That's not what I want to debate right now. I said, but do you know what God said to him? And he shook his head and he said, no. I said, God said to him, I myself will provide. He said, that's right. I said, very close to where you and I are sitting 2,000 years ago, God kept that promise and took his own son, and this time the axe did not stop. I said, Sheikh Talal, until you and I receive the son God has provided for us, we'll be offering our own sons and daughters on the battlefields of this world for position and prestige and land and power. Silence in the room. And the Archbishop says, I guess it's time to go. And so we left. He put his arm around me and encouraged me as we were walking down the stairs, but I was nervous as anything. I walked around and I went to the other side of the SUV to get in because the guest of honor was the Archbishop. Sheikh quickly bade him goodbye and then ran around to the other side, and he turned me around. And he grabbed me by the shoulders and just stared at me, and then kissed me on both sides of the face, and he said, "Mr. Zacharias," he said, "you're a good man. I hope I will see you again someday." And his eyes just turned moist, and he gave me a hard, solid embrace, and we went on, never seen him again. The cross is the message to a world that has no answer for the melody. But thirdly, and quickly I say, I shall skip one point here, it is the hope that he gives by the resurrection from the dead. The hope that he gives by the resurrection from the dead. And when I'm talking about the resurrection, I mean hope not just beyond the grave, talking about the hope that can be a down payment even for now. I want to read for you a poem, and then I want to read for you this article, and I'll be through. It's a very powerful piece of poetry written by a Vietnam vet. Lord God, I have never spoken to you, but now I want to say, how do you do? You see, God, they told me you didn't exist, and like a fool I believed all this. Last night from a shell hole I saw your sky. I figured right then they had told me a lie. Had I taken time to see the things you made, I'd have known they weren't calling a spade a spade. I wonder, God, if you'll take my hand. Somehow I feel that you'll understand. Funny I had to come to this hellish place before I had time to see your face. I guess there isn't much more to say, but I'm sure glad, God, I met you today. I guess 0 hour will soon be here, but I'm not afraid since I know you're near. The signal, well, God, I'll have to go. I like you lots, I want you to know. Look now, this will be a horrible fight. Who knows, I may come to your house tonight. Though I wasn't friendly to you before, I wonder, God, if you'd wait at your door. Look, I'm crying, I'm shedding tears. I'll have to go now, God. Goodbye. Strange now since I met you. I'm not afraid to die. I was in Vietnam during that time. This was handed to me. The hope that only Christ could give, even under a hail of firepower. That hope that God alone is big enough to give to you and me. One of the well-known atheists in England is a man by the name of Matthew Paris, ideologically driven by his atheism. But in 2008 Christmas, he went to Malawi, where he was raised, to watch the NGOs in operation. And he wrote a profound article. I don't have time to read all of it to you. It was a shocker to his readership, because they knew what Matthew Paris lives like. They knew what Matthew Paris believes. Here's some of the paragraphs. He says, traveling in Malawi refreshed another belief too, one I've been trying to banish all my life. It confounds my ideological belief, stubbornly refuses to fit my worldview, and has embarrassed my growing belief that there is no God. Now a confirmed atheist, I've become convinced of the enormous contribution that Christian evangelism makes in Africa, sharply distinct from the secular NGOs. No education and training alone will not do. In Africa, it is Christianity that is changing people's hearts. It brings a transformation. The rebirth is real. I've seen it. The change is good. There's long been a fashion among Western academic sociologists for placing tribal value systems within a ring fence, beyond critiques, founded on theirs and therefore best for them, authentic and intrinsically of equal worth to ours. I don't follow this anymore. I observe that tribal belief is no more peaceable than ours, and that it actually suppresses individuality. People think collectively. This feeds into the big man and gangster politics of the African city, the exaggerated respect for the swaggering leader, and the literal inability to understand the whole idea of a loyal opposition. Anxiety, fear of spirits, of ancestors, of nature and the wild strikes deep into the whole structure of rural African thought, and a great weight grinds down the spirit. But Christianity, with its teaching of a direct personal two-way link between the individual and God, unmediated by the collective and unsubordinate to any other human being, smashes straight through the philosophical spiritual framework I've just described. Those who want Africa to walk tall amid 21st century global competition must not kid themselves that providing the material means or even a know-how that accompanies what we call development will somehow make the change. No, a whole belief system must first be supplanted, and I'm afraid it has to be supplanted by another. Removing Christian evangelism from the African equation may leave the continent at the mercy of a malign fusion of Nike, the witch doctor, the mobile phone, and the machete. I just want to add one footnote, not just for Africa, for the whole world. We have a malign fusion otherwise, unless the transformation comes in the heart, which Jesus Christ alone is big enough to give. China is sending some of its leaders to this part of the world and inviting some of us to come and speak there. They know America's strength lay not just in her economic theory, but in her moral theory. And they want to know what that moral theory was, the very moral theory we are now jettisoning, which the rest of the world recognize was what made this nation great. Jesus Christ. Why? Many, many reasons. He describes you the way you really are. He promises to transform and change your heart. He carries you through the seasons of pain. He rises again from the dead to ultimately show to you that life is not to be measured in this 80 years and 10. And I tell you, outside of the transformation of the heart, there is no hope for mankind, and only Jesus Christ is big enough and powerful enough and unique enough to bring that change. May God richly bless you, and thank you for giving me that hearing.